Welcome to Product Unfiltered, a podcast brought to you by two aspiring product managers in Silicon Valley navigating the exciting world of product management. Join us as we invite amazing product leaders to discuss the latest trend in the industry, share their experience in the product management, and provide insights and advice for those interested in a career in product management. From ideation to launch, we'll cover it all here. So tune in for interviews with industry experts and product managers. I, Rahul Goel, along with Utkarsh Khandelwal, will be your host for Product Unfiltered.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Product Unfiltered. Joining us today, we have Raghav Gupta, Head of Product for Post Order Customer Engagement at Uber. Today, Raghav will talk about his experience leading products in the online food delivery industry. Raghav, can you please introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hey everyone, this is Raghav here. I lead the post engagement customer product at Uber. I've been with Uber for about 3 years now. Before this, I started in the marketplace, ran a couple of product teams in Walmart, ran my own startup, failed miserably, but learned a lot of things, and spent time doing product and customer data science at Capital One. Yeah, happy to talk about whatever little I know in product management today.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Raghav, for introducing to our listeners and audience. As you mentioned about the diverse roles which you had taken previously, working with Walmart and running your own startup, we would actually love to know more about your current role at Uber and what made you choose your current profile and role working in this online food delivery segment at Uber.
So actually, let me try and answer, what my long-term goal is and how this particular role kind of fits into my and why I chose this particular role. So in the long term, I do intend to go back to entrepreneurship. And when you are thinking about building a long-term skill set, I think one of the things you truly think about is how do I make sure that I have diversity of experiences. You have worked across different business problems. You've learned both the breadth and depth. You've grown not just from having built something from scratch, but also operated things on a global scale across the board, and also worked with people that you truly care and value. So I think on those three levers, this particular role really hit the nail. So from a perspective of just pure learning, I had very good experience with building strategy, building go-to-market approaches. But I think from a purely support perspective, I think that was one area where I had very little experience or even an understanding and appreciation of. Another area where I had a decent exposure and understanding was how to build a business from 0 to 1. But operating a global business, which is where you compete locally and you win locally, is a very complex skill set to learn. And I think this team has actually allowed me to build that muscle across the board.
That's great to know, Raghav, and I totally resonate with the point that at one point we learn how to take it from 0 to 1, but the corporate gives you an experience of how to you take that 1 to hundreds and thousands. And we have seen Uber to be known for innovation in the transportation industry. But then we see Uber entering into new domains such as online food delivery or freight logistics. So what I would love to understand from you is how does the product management approach differs when you talk about your traditional transportation business to entering into new areas?
So typically, when you talk about innovation, you think about innovation in three big buckets. One is the innovation around your core business, which is, let's say, for Uber at one point of time, it was rides. Then, how do you build how do you identify adjacent opportunities around that business and innovate around that? So an example would be delivery, an example would be grocery, an example would be logistics, and like delivery as a service. But then the third bucket is around the transformational side of innovation. How do you truly come up with technologies that are absolutely uh, you know far in the future or completely transformational from your perspective. So things like um, you know uh, helicopter travel, or things like self-driving cars. Those are transformational technologies, innovation that you would want to invest in. I think, given just the entire economic environment and where the business is, I think Uber is definitely very strong in the innovation part for its core
Yeah.
and the adjacent businesses. Now, I think a lot of innovation is also very context driven. So I'll give an example here. When COVID hit, making sure that everybody was safe, in the cars or in the rides was super important,
Mhm.
right? So how do you build a technology quickly that can help people whether a driver is wearing a mask or not, or whether a rider is wearing a mask or not? So I think those technologies just needed to be iterated upon very quickly within that core part. But then when you're talking about the adjacent part, how do you lift off a business which is in demand and growing like at a tearing pace? So just some context: Uber Eats grew at a rapid pace during COVID.
Mhm.
How do you make sure you're actually able to scale that business with that pace? Which means, are you able to build technology to be able to onboard drivers faster?
Mhm.
If your drivers or couriers are not able to come onto the platform fast enough, you would not be able to fulfill the orders that you get.
Yeah.
Then how do you build technology to be able to scale to those many support incidents faster?
Mhm.
How do you drive technology to be able to match those many orders more efficiently? The more
Mhm.
orders you have, the more efficiencies you need to be able to drive. How do you actually enable lower cost for the users so that the adoption rate like keeps growing? So think all these different areas of innovation. You just have to think from a perspective of where your business is and what your playing ground is for innovation at that point of time.
That is so interesting. In fact, Raghav, as you talk about these macroeconomic factors like COVID pandemic came in and Uber had to innovate, get into new segments, find out new strategies of innovating the complete online food delivery market. We are also interested to learn more about what are some internal factors which a product manager or someone leading the product has to see before innovating or before entering into a new market.
Yeah. So I think, like you correctly mentioned, right? Not just when you are entering a new market, you not only think about how attractive or viable that market is, but what is your right to win in that market? What is that special sauce that you have that would help you win, in that market? So I think from that perspective, Uber takes that very, very, it takes a very disciplined approach towards uh, investing in a market where we, or in an industry where we believe we have a disproportionate advantage, or we will have a disproportionate capability to
Mhm.
be able to win in that market. And also from a perspective of viability. So I'll give you examples from a 10-minute delivery or instant delivery perspective. Uber did not invest heavily in that space,
Mhm.
um, not because we could not go and win it. It was more likely from a perspective of the viability of that market. But if you look at internal factors, uh, we went and invested in a lot of industries such as delivery as a service, delivering freight, delivering
Mhm.
not just food, but also pharmacy and bunch of other things, because of the core competency that we have, which is from a perspective of the matching algorithms, the technological prowess, which can actually help Uber actually go and dominate that market compared to other companies in that space. So
Mhm.
from an internal perspective, I think the right to win is something that we truly, truly care about when we're thinking about an industry.
I'm really intrigued by one thing. You mentioned about 10-minute delivery. We see startups like Zepto in India who are claiming that this 10-minute delivery is the future and how they are leveraging the existing resources to capture that market. As you mentioned that Uber also had an option to be a part of this 10-minute delivery ecosystem, but after all that thorough internal external analysis, Uber didn't went and compete with these startups in the delivery space. So I'm really curious to understand, as a head of product leading Uber, you have all these vast experiences. What do you think is the future of similar models like 10-minute delivery, Zepto? Are they sustainable in the future? What is your take on that?
To be very honest, I think the reason that Uber probably did not directly go head on into that business uh, was because the model is largely unproven yet.
Mm-hmm.
I think we are already getting to see signals that it is the basket size or the profitability of that business is not yet proven out.
Mm-hmm.
So what we decided to do was we decided to partner with GoPuff in
Mm-hmm.
that space, and you know give that ability for our users to be able to leverage it. But I think in terms of a TLDR, I would say the model still needs proving in terms of like the long-term business viability for it.
Mm-hmm. But what's the core difference in the working model? Because this 10-minute delivery concept has entered the market very recently, but why wasn't it there before, or what different are these people doing from the traditional delivering system?
So I think a lot of times when you think about business or opportunities, you would truly think from a perspective of consumer preferences, consumer demand. Um, I think the one reason why, or this is my hypothesis, like a few reasons why, some of these companies did not invest in the 10-minute, 20-minute delivery maybe 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Well, I think probably because of, I would say, two or three main reasons. One is definitely the consumer behavior.
Mm-hmm.
From a consumer perspective, there was probably not a I want it now behavior
Mm-hmm.
or willingness to pay for that. Two, I think, is from a perspective of cheap capital available to test business models. So I
Mm-hmm.
think the last 2 3 years, there has been a lot of cheap capital available for people to explore building out such business models and
Mm-hmm.
see if they actually work on. And I think third, I would also say, just from a broader perspective, um, 4 or 5 years ago, there were questions around even delivery market, like
Yeah.
delivery as a service or just even food delivery, whether that's a viable business or not. So
Mm-hmm.
I think as some of those hypotheses have proven that you can actually make money while delivering food, I think there has been some uh, you know incentives or excitement to explore whether it is worth delivering food within you know
Yeah.
10 or
10
20
minutes.
minutes
Yeah.
um, of the
True.
consumer. Yeah.
Exactly. And you very rightly mentioned that how consumer preference has changed throughout this decade, right from having a consumer which never even imagined that food delivery in such a huge ecosystem is possible to now consumers are really expecting it to be as fast as possible. So building upon that, what do you think are future trends in this food delivery, online food delivery business? And what is Uber currently doing to innovate itself to match with the current trends in the market?
Yeah. So I think in terms of future trends, I think one trend that is very visible from a broader logistics play is the same day delivery
Mm-hmm.
and quick delivery. Not talking about the 10-minute, 20-minute, but more so from a perspective of retailers are now willing to kind of pay, or the consumers are willing to pay
Mm-hmm.
for the items to be delivered the same day within the same hour. So you have companies like Apple, you have companies like Sephora, etc., where um, you can actually get their products within 1 hour or 2 hours of you actually ordering from the
Mm-hmm.
comfort of your home. So I think just the expansion of delivery or the last mile delivery as a business, I think is a huge area that potentially has a scope to grow. I think other trend that's very visible is the trend around memberships.
Mm-hmm.
Companies are trying to manage their CACs. They're trying to drive longer term engagement and retention. So uh, majority of the delivery companies, including Uber, are investing heavily in customer memberships. Uber has its own Uber One program, where they're actually trying to use a lot of cross sell between rides to eats and eats to rides,
Mm-hmm.
to others. I think given the macroeconomic environment, efficiency is definitely a big bucket that's coming up. I think given that the cost of capital is very different from where it was 2 years ago, I think it is very evident that there is rationalization that's going on. There is more focus on driving more profitability
Mm-hmm.
across the business and building tech to be able to drive a lot of that. So I think building scalable tech, building tech that can actually drive a lot of, for example, efficiency around matching algorithms, sophisticated pricing algorithms, all those things. I think it's gaining a lot of traction. And I think in all these situations, I think leverage truly matters. How do you build a product that is scalable globally, but it helps your business compete
Mm-hmm.
locally with companies, is what's differentiating these days.
So, Raghav, as you mentioned that the consumer behavior is changing with time, and when we talk about online food delivery business, there are so many multiple stakeholders involved in the process, starting from restaurant to delivery partners to customers. So, how do you balance the needs and goals of these different stakeholders when you're developing a new product or a feature?
So if you take a step back, Uber is a marketplace that actually sits between demand and supply.
Mm-hmm.
Demand is basically from customers ordering either a ride or food, and supply is mostly from either drivers, the couriers, or your restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
And the way Uber has to build its products is to make sure that this marketplace, the balance between demand and supply, always stays.
Mm-hmm.
If you have too many users ordering, and very few couriers or restaurants on your platform, or your restaurants are super busy, the customer experience will be impacted hugely and lead to a lot of degradation, both in the short term and long term, in terms of retention and all those metrics. If you have too many couriers, um, you will not they will not have enough earnings or jobs to actually be
Mm-hmm.
able to make money, right? So the goal really is to build products that help balance this demand and supply. uh, so for example, contrary to popular belief, Uber actually does not like uh, search fee or busy area fee. It is actually not something that we at all prefer to have. Ideally, we would prefer not to have search fee at all,
Mm-hmm.
because what that shows is that there is a demand that, or there is more demand than supply in
Mm-hmm.
those areas, right? So you basically pull a lot of levers from a product where you have things like search fees, you have busy areas, you change the SLAs, or you change the expected time. So for example, um, how do you change consumer behavior by showing different ETDs? So if instead of
Mm-hmm.
30 minutes, if I show you 40 minutes of food arrival, can I actually you know deflect you to a different restaurant? How do you change the ranking of different restaurants in terms of your ability to actually deliver from those? So if you change
Mm-hmm.
discoverability, you change where the consumer would order from. So I think there's a lot of nuance in product that can be built to be able to manage a lot of these demand and supply. From a perspective of supply, how do you build product that actually helps these couriers onboard faster?
Mm-hmm.
so that the faster they can onboard onto your platform, the faster they can take their first trips. How do you, build the right incentives? How do you build heat maps for them,
Mhm.
so that they know where the earning is and they can actually go to those places to actually make money. In terms of restaurants, how do you build product for them to actually be able to come and tell you that, hey, I have too many orders, or it's going to take me longer than expected to make the food that's available, or for them to be able to say, hey, my kitchen is just super busy, there is no way I can take more orders, can we just pause some of those orders? So I think there are a lot of different parts of the product that have to work very, very closely, with each other, to be able to build that balance across supply and demand.
So, Raghav, this also brings me to a very interesting question, which I always wanted to have an answer for. So, whenever I see these companies entering into online food delivery business, is the future looking forward towards cloud kitchen, where Uber Eats will be entering into a huge market where they'll have their own cloud kitchen rather than taking it from a restaurant and delivering it?
So I think similar to 10-minute delivery,
Mm-hmm.
um, cloud kitchens are also an area where you know you need still more signals to actually be able to understand whether that's a long term viable business. And I think not just from a long term viability of the business, I think another area that's super important is, does Uber want to be in that business? And I think that's more of a strategic long term call that uh, yes, is being evaluated within the company. But whether that's the direction or not, I think it's still, I would say, TBD.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, as you mentioned that there are some strategic decisions which comes from the leadership team or the strategy team on where to enter, where not to. We would also love to hear about your thought process or your way of working when it comes to matrix definition. How do you define matrix when you're building a product in Uber, or also in general? What is your take on defining matrix for a product success?
So I think in terms of metrics is a question that's usually asked a lot by product managers and aspiring product managers. uh, I think there are a few different ways to look at metrics. One thing definitely is, what is the intended impact and what
Mhm.
is the unintended impact, which means what is the hypothesis that you are trying to drive, and what is the unintended, which is the guardrails. Within the hypotheses, you would want to further break down this into business metrics and product metrics. So business metrics would be your top line, GB, your business metrics would be your bottom line in terms of how much is your variable contribution from every trip. When you're thinking about product specific metrics, you would have metrics for that particular feature or capability, whether you're building something. So from a perspective of, let's say you are you know building out different models to show what is the time that you should show a user.
Mhm.
So because by showing different times you can influence their willingness to order, one metric you would definitely want to look at is the amount of GB, or the business top goal revenue that you were able to bring in. Now, that has an impact on your bottom line from a perspective. If more orders become late, then you actually have to pay a lot of support costs,
Yeah.
refunds, appeasements, a lot of that spend. There is also an impact on your engagement for the user. And now, from a pure product metric perspective, you would want to think from a perspective of how accurate your models are, right?
Mhm.
And what percentage of your orders are actually getting delayed. So that's how you would measure the accuracy or the quality of your product.
Mhm.
Now, you would also want to look at, guardrail metrics, things like what is your retention rate over a longer period of time? Are your users uh, ordering less? Are they, and by less from a perspective of, are they ordering less number of times or less frequently, or are their basket size also going down,
Mm-hmm.
or are they staying relatively flat? So I think things from that perspective. Now, there are a couple of other directions that you would want to look at. Impact can also be seen, um, you know, over a period of time. So one aspect of metrics is how long would you measure, something for. So, for example, at Facebook, people use that app every day. So your metric has to be able to include something at a daily level
Daily.
or at a weekly level. That said, you wouldn't find people ordering food, or majority of your customers at Uber, asking for rides 5 times a day or
Mm-hmm.
ordering food 5 times a day. It's usually, over days and weeks. So the right time frame that you would want to look at is probably, in weeks, in a month, or even from a longer term perspective, because the retention rates show up over a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. And Raghav, as you mentioned about this ever evolving consumer preferences, industry in particular, and also the product domain, it has changed and it is changing so frequently and so rapidly. We would love to understand what are some resources which you follow to keep yourself updated, and what are these resources which you would recommend to aspiring product managers to stay updated with the current trends in the industry.
Yeah. So I think I would say three main resources that I really, really have liked and learned. One would be Reforge. I think the quality of their material is absolutely top notch.
Mm-hmm.
Secondly, it would be Shreyas Doshi. I think the content that he publishes is nuanced, and really helps you, differentiate what to do versus what not to. And the third resource would be Lenny Richitsky's newsletter.
Mm-hmm.
I think that has a lot of nuggets of wisdom. So I would say these three would be my top three picks.
So, Raghav, what would be some of the advices which you want to give out to our listeners? What should they be looking forward to in the industry or in product space in general?
So yeah, I think I would say two main things. One is, I think, if you want to be an entrepreneur, um, being a product manager or doing product management is probably the best training ground that you can have. When you lead a product, the buck for its success or failure stops at you. Whether that's the idea itself, whether it's the go to market, whether it's the strategy, whether it's the execution. um, it's eventually very, black and white. Whether you succeeded or not. And I think that's the kind of mindset that is needed if you want to be an entrepreneur. And secondly, I think it also compresses your learning cycles significantly. The amount of growth, the amount of exposure, the amount of uh, you know the amount you have to stretch yourselves
Mm-hmm.
forces you to learn skills that you would have otherwise learned in other roles and other areas in 5 years. You do it in product within like a year or two
Mm-hmm.
years. Right? So I would say those two things.
Okay. So, Raghav, before we bring this podcast to the end, one last question. What is that one skill set that you look for in aspiring product managers?
Interesting question. So I think the one key skill set, if I have to just pick one, I would say is the ability to bring clarity within confusion. So if I think the most important thing that a product manager does is that they bring clarity around what to do and why to do that. The what and why, I think, is super, super important. And anyone who can bring that, um, I would say, is the uh, most important skill set for a product manager.
I mean, that's a really valuable insight for all of us who are aspiring product managers, or for a matter of fact, who have just entered the product management space and they're exploring their way out. This officially brings us to the end of today's podcast. Hope all our listeners have enjoyed today's episode and the discussion has helped them to learn something new. Stay tuned for more such exciting episodes. Thank you so much for tuning into Product Unfiltered.